You want to know which running backs you should start or sit for Week 16 of the fantasy football season? Stay tuned and find out. Welcome back, Endgame community. I'm Pierre. He's Chris. We're here to break down all the running backs for Week 16 from every matchup, all the ones that matter. Tell you who should be in your lineup and who should be on the bench. No teams on bye, of course, and you should definitely remember that the majority of this week's schedule is on Saturday. There's only 3 games on Sunday, so you've got to set your lineups on time. And don't forget to join us for our Start Sit show on Friday night this week. Before we go to the first of the matchups, there are still some guys you know you can count on. They are must starts. Austin Eckler, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Nick Chubb, Kenneth Walker, and Ramondre Stevenson. All right, the Thursday night game this week is Jaguars facing the Jets. The Jags are putting up a ton of points on offense lately. The Jets not giving up very many. So, what does that mean for Travis Etienne, who actually kind of came through a 100-yard game against the Cowboys? Can he do it against the Jets?
100-yard game? I don't know about that. I mean, the Jets are a pretty good run defense. I mean, DeAndre Swift had a decent day against them. Etienne's getting the volume, though. He actually finally got targeted in the passing game. That was good to see. I definitely don't think Etienne is a must-start this week, but I still think he's a good start.
I mean, I was a little pessimistic about him last week, and he was good, but not great. And that's the thing is, like you said, he doesn't have that really high pass-catching floor like some of the elite backs do. And he's just not scoring touchdowns. That's the problem. They're scoring a lot, but the receivers are doing all the scoring. He's fine. Low-end RB2, not a great spot for him. Startable, but not a guy I expect a ton from still. And then on the other side, I mean, Bam Knight, maybe he never had a chance against that now fearsome Lions run defense. Not kidding. What does Bam do against the Jags?
I mean, this is a much better matchup, but the problem with Bam Knight is he's just a guy who runs the ball. No targets last week. And look, at least with Mike White, there were plenty of dump-offs. With Zach Wilson, he just doesn't dump it off as much. So, I mean, Bam Knight is definitely startable. It's a good matchup, but he feels very touchdown dependent this week. So for me, just kind of like a start him if you need him kind of guy.
Yeah, and that's the thing is this Jets offense with Zach Wilson not going to score a bunch of touchdowns either. And even so, look, Wilson only kind of gets going once they're behind, and then he puts up pretty much garbage time stats. So I'm just going to say Knight, like you said, flex if you need it, but hopefully you got a better RB2 this week in the playoffs. All right, then we have the Falcons taking on the Ravens, 2 very run-heavy offenses. Let's start off with Tyler Algier. Breakout game for him last week. And look, Caleb Huntley is out for the season with that Achilles injury. Are we going to see even more from Algier, or are you worried about the matchup?
Well, I do think we're going to see more, but I'm also worried about this matchup. I mean, this is a great run defense. Now, they may be without their defensive tackle, Calais Campbell, which would help. But also, this Atlanta team, they just want to run the ball as much as they can, and they have one of the best offensive lines in football. So I'm not going to say Algier is a guy you have to start, but with the volume he's more than likely going to see behind this offensive line, I think even in a tough matchup, he's still a good start.
Yeah, again, really bad timing of the matchup, especially if you scooped up Algier. Like I talked him up a week ago on the early waiver wire video, and hopefully you did stash him because now you got him. But, I mean, you can't feel great. At Baltimore, the Ravens are kind of desperate to win and stay in that playoff hunt. And the Ravens have been really good against running backs lately. So I got to put him probably a tick below Etienne. And I don't love Etienne this week, so he's a decent start, but I'm definitely worried about this matchup. And then we got Cordero Patterson. I mean, he looks good in bursts, but I think those bursts are becoming, fewer and far between. And I kind of think his role is going to diminish as Algier grows. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. What did he get? Like 12 PPR points with a touchdown? I mean, man, just very, very touchdown dependent. This is still a tough matchup, like you said. We could see more Algier. I'm sitting Cordero Patterson.
Yeah, without a touchdown, Patterson, He's really not doing anything for you, not catching passes despite his past as a receiver. I don't think you can start Patterson this week. And then there's that man, J.K. Dobbins. Look, the concerns are still there that his knee, which does not look like a normal human knee, could just explode at any time. But over 120 yards 2 straight weeks. Couldn't you possibly keep him on your bench against the Falcons?
I mean, only if you have really good options, because the matchup is so good again. He looks good enough to definitely be startable. Again, I'm not going to say a must start because, that speed and that burst just really isn't there yet for him. But, he can always score a touchdown. It's a good matchup. He's a good start this week.
I mean, I know it was a good matchup last week, but at home against the Falcons, I can't keep him on my bench if I had him, which now I do wish I did have more J.K. Dobbins, but I think you've got to start him. Lions going to go on the road to Carolina and face the Panthers. Well, let's start with DeAndre Swift. I mean, just so frustrating. I don't even know if there's another word for DeAndre Swift's season other than frustrating. Does that frustration just carry over to Week 16?
It has to. I don't get it. Like, he looked great in Week 15, right? He had 85 total yards on only 13 touches. He looked explosive. He looks fully healthy, and still they give, Jamal Williams 13 carries for, 2 yards per carry. They give Justin Jackson run. It's very frustrating, but I still think, he got 9 targets. He got 5 catches. Like I said, he had 85 yards. He's got that explosive ability. It's a better matchup this week. Definitely not going to say, a must start, but I think he's a guy you can start.
At that point, you're just hoping that he gets a touchdown, that he gets a few receptions. I don't feel like the game script is necessarily going to be in his favor. Again, don't know what the deal is. I get Jamal Williams kind of being that between the tackles guy, wearing down the defense. I don't. It's just beyond me how Justin Jackson is getting more touches than DeAndre Swift if Swift is healthy, which he should be. So he's a risky flex, and that's it. And then Jamal Williams, I mean, touchdown or bust. Didn't score last week. Does he score this week?
Maybe, but even with a touchdown, he's going to bust. What would he have gotten you if he had scored on one of those goal line runs where he got stuffed? What would he have gotten you? 9 points? 10? Come on. Not starting Jamal Williams.
In a standard, non-PPR league, sure, you can start him. But I think you've got to go for more upside. It's the playoffs, man. You've got to go for more upside. So other than that, he's kind of a desperation flex this week. And then speaking of Deontay Foreman, he's been great, but he looks like he's kind of slowing down lately and kind of got called out by Steve Wilkes for not finding the holes and having better vision. Are you worried about Deontay Foreman?
I mean, you've got to be. And now he's going against this suddenly elite Detroit Lions run defense. He doesn't catch passes. I am not starting Deontay Foreman in my semifinal matchup. No chance.
You can't. I mean, for a guy who's supposed to be this big physical back, he got stuffed multiple times last week, looking slower, like he's slowing down. And again, this Detroit defense, they have shut down in recent weeks Saquon Barkley, Dalvin Cook. Everybody who's gone against the Lions lately just can't run the ball. I mean, there's no way I'm starting Deontay Foreman at all. I might have a little more interest in Chuba Hubbard because he's a little more, explosive on the outside and he's catching passes. But can you trust him this week?
I mean, only if you're extremely desperate. I mean, yes, you're right. I like him more than Foreman because he will at least catch some passes. And he's looked, more explosive of the two lately. But still, this is a tough matchup. It's Detroit's on the road, and we've seen it on the road. They don't blow teams out on the road, right? They kind of just hang around when they're on the road. So I don't expect this to be a game where Chuba Hubbard's going to catch 6-7 passes. I'm not starting Chuba Hubbard either.
Desperation flex. I'll say I like him better than Foreman, maybe better than Jamal Williams, but still, you can't start him unless you really are in a deep league. All right, the Bills are going to travel to Chicago and face the Bears. Let's start with James Cook. Got a touchdown last week, but then again, so did Nyheim Hines. At least we saw Cook kind of get back into, the swing of things. Do you think that he'll be more involved this week?
I don't know. I mean, he got a little more involved last week, but he got that touchdown, but he didn't get a ton of usage. It is a good matchup versus the Bears, but man, just very, very risky to me. I'm not starting James Cook this week.
Yeah, again, until further notice and until something changes, I think it's going to be this same kind of committee deal. Cook is just going to be a risky flex in PPR leagues, and I kind of feel the same way with Devin Singletary. Obviously, his upside is a little bit limited with Cook getting more involved. So, like, if you need him, maybe, but that's about it.
Yeah, borderline flex for me for Devin Singletary, only because he kind of did. He kind of has reasserted himself the last two games. I mean, I know Cook was more involved on Saturday, but when you look, he really wasn't that involved. So, but still, Singletary really, really, really needs a touchdown. Yeah, barely a flex for me.
What about David Montgomery? Looked really good last week. Maybe the lack of receivers on the Chicago team will keep Montgomery, in the mix here. How do you feel he can do against Buffalo?
Well, a few weeks ago, I would have said, no way I'm starting David Montgomery against the Bills, but he just looked great against the Eagles, and Raheem Mostert just ran all over this Bills defense. Like, not having Von Miller there has been a big blow. They're missing a lot of key players on defense right now. I know they might be getting a little healthier this week, but still, but also, Montgomery 2 touchdowns last week. Are we really banking on another 2-touchdown game? May see Khalil Herbert back this week. I think Montgomery's like a flex, start him if you need him kind of guy.
I'll put him a little higher, kind of like low-end RB2 range, kind of there with maybe Tyler Algier. But I still feel a little bit better about him because of his usage. Not a must-start, but I think he's pretty solid. And then you mentioned Khalil Herbert, off of IR, clear to practice. Not sure if he'll play, and if so, how much. If he's active, can you trust him?
No way, because we've seen in the games where Montgomery and Herbert are both healthy, it's mostly David Montgomery, and now you got him coming off IR, first game back. Yeah, not trusting him.
Nah, neither am I. Let me see how much usage he gets first, but I cannot start him, especially in the playoffs. Saints going to take on the Browns. Well, what do we do with Alvin Kamara? Looked better as a runner, but still just not being used as a receiver, which is extremely puzzling.
Yeah, he got incredible usage as a runner, right? 21 carries, you'd love to see that, but only 2 targets, only 2 receptions. Like, man, that just really caps his ceiling, because we know that's where he makes his bread and butter, but still, getting that kind of volume in a good matchup, here against Cleveland this week, who we know is really bad against the run. Not going to say a must start, but I think he's a good start.
I think he stays in the RB2 range because it's the Browns. It's so weird. Look, Dennis Allen can't figure out how to use him in this offense. Maybe just look at film from last year and the year before when Alvin Kamara was there. It's not that hard, but you can't love his ceiling, but he is at least startable. Seahawks going to take on the Chiefs. Jerick McKinnon, man, is he a guy you just can't even think about anymore? You just have to put him in your lineup with what he's done these last 2 weeks?
You have to, right? You have to. Look, maybe this is the week. Talk about the Christian Watson, right? Maybe this is the week where he comes crashing back down. But are you going to risk having that on your bench again? It's the Seahawks. It's another smash spot. He's got, 17 targets over the last 2 games, 15 catches. You got to start him.
That's a thing. It's like the matchup almost doesn't matter because he's not just a runner. He is a receiver out of the backfield. He's like a little slot receiver who can run the ball. Yeah, look, I wish I would have started him last week. Wish I would have said start him instead of Pacheco. Who knew this was going to carry on? You have to just start McKinnon. But what does that mean for Pacheco? He was still good last week. Definitely effective as a runner. But do you feel like he has enough upside with McKinnon doing what he's doing?
That's the problem. He is good as a runner, but he's just a runner in this offense. He's just a between the tackles runner. And the worst part was last week, Jerick McKinnon got all the goal line work, not Pacheco. So if he's not going to get the goal line work and lose that touchdown upside, doesn't really have a huge ceiling now. But in this matchup against the Seahawks, he's at least, does have a high floor, I feel like. So I definitely would rather start McKinnon than Pacheco, which is crazy to say, but that's where we're at. But I still think Pacheco is a good start.
I will say I think Pacheco is still a very good start. If you look at it, he's still getting carries. He could have had a bigger game, except that fumble that he had kind of midway through last week. That kept him on the sideline for a little while, allowed McKinnon to do more. But look, the Seahawks have become one of the worst. They might be the worst run defense by the time the season's over. They're now allowing the second most fantasy points to running backs, and over the last month, they have allowed the most. So it's so hard not to start a running back against them. I feel like Pacheco is still in that RB2 conversation. It might even get slept on this week because everyone's all about McKinnon. Don't forget about Pacheco. Bengals going to take on the Patriots. Look, Joe Mixon is not a no doubt must start anymore because he's still kind of ceding some work to Samaje Perine. Look, I thought he was going to have a really good game last week. He did not. So how do you treat Joe Mixon against the Patriots, which are a really good run defense?
Yeah, I mean, I think you still have to start Joe Mixon, but he's definitely not a smash. Lock him in your lineup, feel good about it. This is another really tough matchup. I mean, you and I were talking about it for weeks now. Like, he's got a brutal playoff schedule. It doesn't get any better next week either. So, yeah, I think you still got to roll him out, though, but not a must start, of course.
In most cases, you're probably starting Joe Mixon, but I am definitely worried if I have him right now. We talked about this, if y'all remember, a couple of weeks ago, talked about our top 10 playoff running backs. He was down near the bottom of the list. He's still a guy, of course, you probably put in your lineup, but I will just say this. If I have J.K. Dobbins or Miles Sanders, I'm going to start those guys instead of Joe Mixon this week. But for the most part, you could still go with him. He's got touchdown upside. Commanders coming off a really tough loss, and now they get to go on the road to face the 49ers and their number one run defense. Look, Brian Robinson looked good, but can you put him in a lineup knowing the matchup he's about to face?
I mean, I'm not going to say you have to sit him because he has looked pretty good. He's getting a decent amount of volume, but you're probably going to need a touchdown this week, right? He doesn't really have much of a ceiling to begin with, but if he's going to have any kind of a ceiling this week, you probably need a touchdown. So for me, like a borderline flex option this week.
Yeah, that's as high as you can go. Again, this is a defense that is just shutting, all running backs down. You could flex them, but you could also be very disappointed if you did. Antonio Gibson, gonna guess we're not too much higher on him.
No, I'm not starting Antonio Gibson. I mean, he's definitely not seeing the usage we need to be a start, especially in a tough matchup. Not starting Antonio Gibson.
Maybe he catches a few passes, but look, this is not the strength of this offense is, dumping it down to the running back. It's not like he's getting so many catches. I'm just going to say I'll fade Gibson to the point where he's almost unstartable. Probably the game of the week here is going to be the Eagles at the Cowboys, but that's if Jalen Hurts plays. If not, this could be a very different kind of matchup. So let's talk about Miles Sanders. On paper, you'd think it's not a great spot for him, but the Cowboys have been looking a little more vulnerable on defense lately. How do you treat Sanders this week?
Yeah, I mean, because I talked about a lot with Etienne. I was telling people, hey, I think it's going to be like a good Etienne week. The Cowboys haven't been very good against the run really most of the year, and he had a nice game. The risk with Sanders is what we saw, in Week 15 in a smash matchup against the Bears. They just don't give him the ball. They just don't give him the ball at all. But if Jalen Hurts is out, you got to feel great about Miles Sanders because they will give him the ball. You got to think so. But either way, I think you got to start Miles Sanders. One of these guys that can boom and win your week. So I think you just got to roll them and just take whatever he gives you.
That's the thing. He's one player who might benefit from Jalen Hurts not being on the field because they'll give him the ball more. I feel pretty good about him. I can't say I think he's going to go off. It's not like he's facing the Giants or the Packers. But I think he's, again, a solid RB2. And I already mentioned I would play him over a guy like Joe Mixon. And then there's Tony Pollard. Didn't quite smash last week. This week, well, he gets to go against the Eagles. But is Pollard still at least a decent start?
Yeah, he's got to be. I mean, he got incredible usage last week. Just had one of those games where he didn't do a whole lot with it. I mean, he wasn't terrible, right? He got you like 14 in PPR, but he's one of those guys, again, like Miles Sanders. He can win you your week by himself. Eagles did look a little vulnerable to the run last week after looking great the week before. I think you got to play Tony Pollard.
Yeah, it would be hard to sit a guy like him. He's got that home run ability. He's kind of like Miles Sanders, right? He doesn't necessarily have to get a ton of volume, so I'm still keeping him as a solid start. Zeke I might be a little more worried about, but I think he's at least flex worthy if you need him.
Yeah, I agree. This is finally a tough matchup for him. He's had a bunch of good matchups, but he always gets chances to score. Anytime they get near the goal line, they're going to give the ball to Zeke. So, and he's actually looked pretty good recently. So I think, I agree with you as a flex option.
Raiders at the Steelers, final game of Saturday night. So let's talk about Najee Harris. It's been much better lately. Now he faces the Raiders. How high are you on him?
Unfortunately, I think Najee Harris is a guy you pretty much have to start this week because the matchup is so good. But Jaylen Warren is getting more involved than we'd like to see, but still, Najee can always score. He's looking good. He looks like the guy we expected to have all season. Got to think that foot was really a bigger issue earlier in the year than they let us know. It's such a good matchup. I think you got to start Najee Harris.
Yeah, I'm definitely starting Najee wherever I have him. But look, as somebody who has him in multiple leagues, I hated seeing Jaylen Warren get in there in that goal line package and get a couple of carries and, of course, a touchdown. It happens, but I'm not worried. Najee's getting almost all the volume. Rushing-wise, it's a great spot for him. I feel really good about Najee this week. And then, what about Jaylen Warren? He's used as a pass catcher. He did score. Could be involved. And again, the matchup is good. So is he in the flex conversation?
I think only because of the matchup. I'm not banking on Jaylen Warren getting goal line carries again and scoring a touchdown because he's a smaller guy, but because the matchup is so good and he's getting enough usage, I think you could flex him if you need to.
Yeah, I'll say that, in a full PPR league, you could go with him. Not the best option, of course, but at least he's sort of on the radar. All right, now let's get to the Sunday games. Not too many of them. Packers going to face the Dolphins. Dolphins, of course, in a slump. Let's see if they get right now that they're back in Miami. What do you think Aaron Jones does to Miami?
Yeah, Aaron Jones is always one of these guys. I feel like you almost have to start him and just take what you can get. He can always score. He, always can rip off, long runs. Doesn't need a ton of volume. Can catch passes. Don't love him this week in this matchup, but I think he's still a good start.
Well, I think I kind of love him in this matchup. He's a type of running back that does damage to Miami. Of course, he can always go for big runs, and he's averaging over 5 yards to carry on the season, but he will get his through the passing game, and that is definitely a weakness of this Miami defense. So I think Aaron Jones is borderline must start this coming week. A.J. Dillon, not so much. You're hoping for a touchdown, but I think he's really a desperation flex.
Yeah, desperation flex at best. Probably needs to score to really save your day.
Now, here's the tricky part. Raheem Mostert, you know what he did last week, went off. Can he do it again, A? And B, if Jeff Wilson comes back, what does that mean? So, how do you feel about Mostert?
That's a big wild card here, but I think I still feel pretty good about Mostert, even with Jeff Wilson, because it's the Packers who are terrible against the run. But also, we saw, even before Jeff Wilson missed a game, Mostert was kind of taking over this backfield potentially. So, I not a must start, of course, especially if Jeff Wilson plays. If Wilson is out, then I think Mostert is a must start. But if Wilson plays, I still think he's a good start.
Yeah, that's a good point. If Wilson doesn't play, you got to roll with Mostert for the most part, depending on who else you got. Even so, everything you said, I think Mostert is still going to be the guy. I think he's definitely going to be the most explosive of the two backs because we know Wilson is not 100%. Mostert is looking good. And it's a great spot for him. Really, the part that I wish I knew is how much are the Dolphins going to commit to running the ball because they did it and it worked. So I kind of just hope they do that again. Maybe I'm being overly optimistic, but I think Mostert is a really strong RB2. And then what about Jeff Wilson? If he's active, how good can you feel about him?
Can't feel great. Like I said, before his injury, it felt like Raheem Mostert was kind of taken back over. Coming off injury, not starting him.
I will say if he's good to go, he's got some touchdown upside just because Green Bay's run defense is pretty porous. So he could be flexed. I don't hate him as much as some of these other running backs we've talked about, but it would be still kind of a stretch. So really a low-end flex option. Broncos taking on the Rams. Look, Latavius Murray had himself a day. Can't see I saw that one coming. Do you see more of that in the near future, specifically against the Rams defense?
against the Rams. Even without Aaron Donald, this is still a strong run defense. The way you attack this defense is through the air, which the Broncos can't do. Look, you want to chase last week's crazy game for Latavius Murray. Good for you. I'm not. I'm sitting him.
Let's not forget, Russell Wilson will be back. They already announced he's going to start. It probably means they're going to rely less on the running game than they felt like they had to. I'm not chasing Latavius Murray either. Look, congrats to him for having a big game, but not going to do anything for me and my fantasy team. Marlon Mack, look, he's actually been kind of involved and been decent. Is enough to encourage you to start him.
Now, if I'm not starting Murray, who's getting more work, I'm definitely not starting Marlon Mack.
I didn't think so, but, figure I'd ask. I'm not either, and, I was big on Mack in the preseason, and still. No Broncos. Sorry, not doing it. What about Cam Akers, lead runner for the Rams? I know it's the Broncos. I mean, is the matchup enough to push him to the can't start territory?
I wouldn't go that low because he can always score, but yeah, desperation flex.
Yeah, look, he's getting volume. I'll say he's an RB3, which means flex if you need to. You should probably be able to do better this week. And then Sunday night we'll bring the Cardinals at home to face the Bucs. Two, I dare say, the most disappointing teams this season. So let's start with the running game, which has been disappointing for Tampa. Rachaad White, does he get better?
I mean, it's a better matchup. They've had a couple of really tough matchups, but I mean, how good can you feel about Rachaad White? I mean, either of these running backs, right? They're splitting. This offense is not good right now. They're turning the ball over. They're making mistakes. I mean, only because the matchup is so good and we know he'll catch passes, I'm going to say you can flex him if you need him.
The matchup is better. I feel a little better about him than last week. But again, these two backs are just kind of cannibalizing each other's, upside. RB3 in PPR leagues only. Decent floor play. That's it. Leonard Fournette, basically everything I just said. Again, he'll probably get you 10, 11 points, and that's it.
Yeah, desperation flex, that's it.
James Conner, well, he's the only back there in Arizona, but they could be down to a third-string quarterback. How good can you feel about him?
I think you still got to feel pretty good. I mean, 2 weeks in a row, I was like, this is a tough matchup, and he's kind of overcome them, and it doesn't matter because he's getting incredible volume. Like, he's really, no other running back even really sees the field for the Cardinals, so not a must-start, of course, because it is another really tough matchup against this Tampa run defense, but you can always score. He catches passes. I'll say a good start.
Solid start. Again, volume is king. That's what you want to go for at the running back position. At least you know he's going to get the opportunity to score points. I think he's probably a decent RB2 this week. And then on Monday night, we have the Chargers against the Colts. So, look, Jonathan Taylor, he's out, done. Are we going to see more of Deion Jackson, who we have seen, or is it going to be Zach Moss leading the way? Let's start with Jackson. What do you expect?
Yeah, this is going to be the toughest question of Week 16, no doubt about it. Which Colts running back do you want? Because it's the Chargers, right? It's a good matchup. Like, you want the running back who's taking over for Jonathan Taylor. Early in the season, we saw Deion Jackson catch a ton of passes, but they didn't have anybody behind him, right? They had Phillip Lindsay was the only guy behind him back then. Not that Zach Moss is going to catch passes, but he only caught one pass in that game on Saturday. I know they were winning a lot, but they still threw it a lot. I mean, Michael Pittman had 19 targets, so it's not like they didn't throw the ball. I guess Deion Jackson, because he does catch some passes and it is a good matchup, I'll say he's a flex start.
Yeah, I mean, you can't love either of these backs, but again, Chargers run defense, which has been a little better lately, still one of the worst in the league on the whole this season. Deion Jackson is the guy I would prefer. He's a flex play at best, but still, definitely could play him. He's the pass catching back. He's the better back, honestly. Even though Moss got more volume, Jackson was the better runner. Moss averaged, I think, 3.4 yards per carry. Jackson, we've seen him do it in the past this season. So I think Jackson is flex worthy. Moss, I'm just going to say no to. Again, the game script would have to be, like last week, very, very positive for him to get all these carries and chances. I don't expect that. I'm not going to trust Moss.
Yeah, Zach Moss would be only in non-PPR leagues where you don't have to worry about him not catching any passes. Because it is a Chargers, he could score, but only in non-PPR leagues. Otherwise, a sit.
All right, now that you've got a handle on which running backs should be in or out of your lineup, don't forget to check in on wide receivers, quarterback, tight end, and everything else you need to win in Week 16. We have our playlist right here with all the fantasy advice you need to win.